Thank you for the introduction. I think I will speak without a mic if you don't mind. Can you hear me? Good, because it's hard to be stuck over there. So what I'm going to do today is give you an update on low latency networks, and I will do a kind of broad brush presentation with three cases. One which is low latency between Chicago and New Jersey, another one in New Jersey local, and the third one will be a discussion of what can be done with shortwave radio and, interesting stuff. So let me start with motivating why there are low latency networks. And everyone knows that, but what I wanted to show here is a graph that we did about 5 years ago to say what we're going to do, and we were focused on essentially the equities, and we were motivating this here with the futures and cash equities and saying, look, we'll need to build all of that. And that was, a tall and difficult thing to do, and I'll show you how much we've done of that. But now we're doing a little brighter picture here, and also showing different asset classes. So those different asset classes are commodities, FX, equities, rates, and you see there's still a lot to be done. And I've drawn a few of those yellow lines, which really are the links of predilection for shortwave radios, and I'll get to that. So if you look at, as I said, what we did, that's where we are today. And every single link of that has part of it which is a microwave that we built. So we own almost everything except the transatlantic link. And that's where we were a few years ago. And part of our business, one of the difficulties in our business is, the data centers may move. And that's really bad for us. You spend a few years building to a place, and whoop, this place is gone. And you have to redo everything. So that's tough. So if you look at this map, it's actually reasonably static. And where we were a few years ago, which is hard to read here, we had Piscataway, we had Halsey here, and we had LHC. And those are gone. So the rate of change is not too dramatic. We just, ask respectfully the CME not to move and to stay put. If anyone from the CME is here and has any say in this, please don't move. And actually, what we respectfully ask is the politicians in Illinois not to tax the CME too much so that they are not incented to move. That's the real ask. Now let me focus in this race first on a link that we're not operating, which is the link between Chicago and Washington, D.C. So this is said to be the most competitive one. And it's the most competitive one because it really is winner takes all. So it's winner takes all, and how do you go about looking at the intensity of a race? So it's all about getting data. So we get data from the FCC website, and one of the ways that we thought was interesting was to look at the number of licenses filed and not expired as a function of time. So if you look at that, here we're graphing, this is number of active license. This is elapsed time, it's in months, and the last data is when this graph was prepared was about a couple of weeks ago. And you can see that very clearly there that the orange guys, they're definitely working on it. They've been working on it since the very beginning. They have acquired the blue guys, actually. So you see the blue and the orange, they're together. They're definitely working on that. If you look at the gray guys, they're also serious. So those two teams, on one side the New Line Networks, and on the other side the DRW Vigilant Chopper Network, those are the two contenders. And from a very simple graph like this, you can see that the yellow guys have not been improving very much. They're probably not trying to win that race. So it really is a two-team race in that case. So from that simple thing, you can see that. Now let me turn to the other big terrestrial microwave network in the US. And here the situation is a bit more complicated. You have more contenders. First, let me note that we decided to show only the active license counts, because if we'd shown all the filings, then there would have been only noise. There would have been like a gigantic peak here, and like you wouldn't really see the activity here because there was a gigantic rush to file for frequencies at some point in time around 2012, or maybe 2011, 2012. And at that point, you would completely remove the signal from the noise. And signal to noise is something that's really important that we'll get back to in the shortwave radio discussion. So if you do your analysis well, you remove the noise, and you can see they're also actually the same two teams battling for supremacy. So you see the blue guys, you can't really read it, but the blue guys are New Line. And the blue guys are actually also teaming up with the gray guys who are Virtue. Virtue are part of New Line. So you can see that those two together are actually the highest number of licenses, or maybe they're tied with the green guys. And the green guys are DRW and Vigilant. And they're two different networks, but they're essentially there. So you can see those two guys are still there. They're improving. They're working on it. They're definitely trying. And then there's us. That's why I'm showing this one. The red guys, that's us. And we've also been working at it. And I will show you here. It's hard to see, but I will try and convince you that now this race is a really three-team race. But what's interesting here is there are other guys working on it, and there are other guys for, a variety of reasons. One of them is that for CME or for Chicago to New Jersey in general, there's actually room for tier 2. It's not completely a tier 1 and winner-takes-all strategy. There's room for tier 2. So there's action for the networks that are good, but maybe not compete for the last microsecond. And there's also an interesting guy. Here is the Scientel network that everybody's interested in knowing who they are and who they work for. There's been a lot of papers around them. I don't think anyone has really shown evidence of the client they're working for, so I won't speculate on that. And the other thing that I wanted to show here is, there was a whole game at the beginning. There was a whole game of trying to hide who you were. So we filed under interesting Harvard names. All the names that we used were Harvard names. So that was easy to pierce. And by the way, Pierce is one of the Harvard names. But that was easy. But some guys had really hawky names. Thought Transmission was a really good one, I thought. And all of those things were trying to hide who they were. But there was one particular one who's still there called Cryptic. And Cryptic, what's funny about them is that they were hiding who they were, but they weren't hiding they were hiding, were they? You don't call yourself Cryptic if you're trying to hiding, you're not doing something. So and they're still there, and we don't really know what they're doing. But another way to look at this, so you can't exactly see that it's a three-man race unless you actually go a little deeper in the analysis and look at all the active licenses filed. And by the way, don't need to take pictures. I'll put it on the website today. Don't worry, everything's going to be there. You can take pictures of me. I won't be in the website. If you look at that, and I've chosen to only show the licenses that were filed since January 1st. And you can see that definitely there's action between DC and CME, there's action between DC and New Jersey, and the action between Chicago at large and New Jersey at large is less, it's a bit more diverse. If I were to show you different colors, it's a bit hard to do, but if I were to show you different colors for the different networks, you would see there was like the really serious networks competing to be the fastest actually are on top of each other on the geodesic. So the real action is happening on this line, which is the geodesic. And what's interesting is that it's not Chicago to New Jersey, it's actually CME to Secaucus, CME to NY2 and I4 and I5. That's where the real race is. And I would like to quote one of my best competitors, Eric, who told me, yeah, I think last year, but we'll all be within 1 microsecond of each other, won't we? And I think he's absolutely right. It's taken us a bit of time, and maybe it's only at the end of this year, but every one of the 3 big competing networks will be within 1 microsecond of each other. And that's really tight when you think of it for a 12,000 kilometer build. And that's where we think it's going to be by the end of this year. So if I backtrack a bit and look at the microwave networks in the US, the long haul ones, I would say there's still competition. It's either 2 teams, maybe 3 teams for that one. The technology itself is not changing radically. Like the radios are improving, we're pulling on the cables, but the technology is not fundamentally different. And that is probably going to last for a while. So you never know. But I would predict it's a 3-man race for a while, and the technology doesn't change very much. Now, the picture is actually quite different in New Jersey local. So here we plotted, in green our network, and in yellow and blue what we see in our analysis, that's number 2 and number 3. And really, I'm not sure, like Totora may be first on one and BSO first on the other 2 or something like this. But that's based on indirection only. And the big thing in New Jersey local is that we introduced completely new radios in a completely different band. So 5 years ago, we took a big bet and we decided to lease exclusive access to an LMDS band, which has a lot of frequency space. And it took us a long time to develop the radios. And now we're there, we installed 2 of the links, and we're actually where we thought we were going to be. We're today the fastest and have delivered 5 gigabits of bandwidth, and that makes a huge difference. Now, where do we expect this to go? Like, obviously, the existing networks will try and improve. I'm not sure how it will shake out. We feel pretty good because we have a frequency band with absolutely 0 interference, much more robust in rain, and a perfect path because we have no one to interfere with, so we can do whatever we need to do. But I'm sure the other guys will try and improve their networks too, and that will be interesting to watch. When I presented that a year ago, because we kind of try and say what we're going to do, we had an analysis of the difference between having a 1 gig network and a 5 gig network. And this analysis was all about comparing the bandwidth that you need to transport NASDAQ FPGA data and what it did if you try and fit the 10 gig NASDAQ FPGA into 1 gig, or if you try to fit it into 5 gig. And I'd like to revisit that because lo and behold, what we have delivered and what we're measuring is exactly what we predicted a year ago. And here, this graph is on the horizontal axis, the additional latency over a baseline, which is a transport latency. So that does not factor path length. This is only looking at the impact of the wider band, of the wider bandwidth. And this is the modeled 1 gig network. The orange line is the modeled 5 gig network. And the gray line is the, the blue line is the measured network that we delivered. So you can see our measurements actually agree with the model fairly well. There's a little bit of a difference over there. And now when you look at a graph like this, you say, okay, well, you know, it's pretty simple. You have roughly a 500 nanosecond advantage if you go from 1 gig to 5 gig. But that's not quite the whole story, because it looks like 500 nanoseconds, but there's actually a lot of action over there in the queue, in the tail. And if you want to probe the tail, you have to ask yourself, you know, where is the action, what are the packets from NASDAQ that count? And those packets really are the packets which have trades in them. Because most of the packets otherwise are, you know, someone changing their bid on the first limit or maybe the third limit. This is not very informative. What is really informative is actually packets, market data packets with trades, and maybe only trades on the S&P 100 stocks. So if you actually do that analysis, and you're really going to probe the queues, so we're doing the same thing, but we're restricting the analysis to only the packets that have trades with S&P 100 stocks. And you can see that when you go and probe the tails, and obviously also when you go up in the distribution, you have more bursty times, and those are the more interesting times. So if you go up here, actually the edge you have from moving from 1 gig to 5 gig is more of the order of 2 microsecond. So now, you know, the other thing that you can read in this is that the extra edge you get from going from 5 gig to 10 gig is capped by this distance if you look at the model, and you know, there are other reasons, other things coming into play, but essentially it's capped by this. And if you go from 5 gig to 10 gig, you can only recoup a fraction of that. So the story is move from 1 gig to 5 gig. In the tails, when it counts, it's about 2 microseconds. If you move from 5 gig to 10 gig, it's probably only 200 nanoseconds. So at this point, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And there's obviously trade-offs everywhere. And if you increase your modulation, you will decrease your robustness, and you will increase your downtime. So as you go from 5 gig to 10 gig, you pay a lot. So we kind of like where we are with a more robust frequency and a 5 gig network. So obviously, that's a very different picture than the microwave long haul. And you can see that the tables have turned quite a bit. We don't expect them to turn again radically today. We don't know, we can't predict, but we believe that we'll stay with the best service for quite a while. So let's look at the third part of the talk, which is back to those networks that you can do with shortwave. And what's really interesting is building every point to every point really makes absolutely no sense because it's too expensive. But with HF, you can oh, is that my vodka?
Oh, that's your vodka, yes.
Thanks, gin. All right, thank you. So it makes no sense. But with shortwave, you can actually broadcast from one place and listen in many places. So that changes the economics, because a broadcasting station is expensive, but a listening station is not. So you can actually broadcast one place and listen many places. Maybe the goal of connecting at least the big dot, which is Chicago, to many of the small dots, maybe that's within reach now. So how do we study that? And of course, like, the FCC is great if you want to download the licenses for microwave, but if you want to know what's going on in HF, it's a little bit more difficult. So what did we do? So we did the same thing. Essentially, we looked at the number of experimental licenses filed in a radius of 200 kilometers around Aurora. And as a function of the years, and you can see that there's actually some action going on. And this is interesting. It shows you that there's indeed some kind of a race coming on. And if you look at the names of the people that filed it, it's the same thing again. It's funny names. You don't know which one of the actual HFTs behind those. And we have handouts where you can actually vote. So, if you put your name and answer and say your guesses as who's an HFT, and maybe you guess who is the firm behind the HFT. So if you hand those out at our booth, we'll give you little gifts. And if we agree with your guesses on who the firms are, we'll give you bigger gifts, obviously. And we'll try maybe to publish the results. Anyway, so of course, like, you can see that the guys who are really ahead in this race, it should be obvious to everyone, is DuPage Public Safety Communications. Those are probably the best. They started a long time ago. Anyway, don't want to tell. So where are those guys located? Well, they're suspiciously around the CME. So it kind of tells you it has something to do with shortwave radios. So now, once you've done that, like, you haven't really studied the thing. And one of the issues with a shortwave radio is you can kind of find where people are broadcasting from, but it's hard to tell where they listen, because you can put an antenna anywhere and be listening. So to do that, you have to rely on, a collective of people. And I asked our collective good friend, the sniper in Mawa, to send me a collage of intel that he's either gathered himself, or he was sent by either anonymous or less anonymous sources. And he sent me this. The nice thing is, the broadcast stations are actually big. So if you go around biking in this area, you can probably see them. What's really good about the sniper is he has a lot of informants everywhere. And you can actually see, like, this one's pretty nice. That's an array of loop antennas somewhere, I think, in England. And people driving around see that and say, oh, wow, what's going on? Some of them like it, research and send it to him. And he has this whole network of people that tell him things. And he's a great information warehouse in a way. He's almost like a market. So anyway, I would like to give him my many thanks for doing that. And that'll be shared in the presentation. So now, once you've done that, you haven't done everything. Because if you're trying to listen to what's going on, then it's easy. You can listen, you can see, and you can try and see who's actually broadcasting and when and how and why, maybe. So I have to tell you that before publishing this or doing any of this, we took legal advice. It's okay to listen, and to listen to essentially what the signals are in terms of quality, the physics of it. It's not okay to decode and understand what's behind. It's not okay to make money out of it. So, we're not making any money out of it. We're just studying the physics of it so far. So what are you looking at here? We set up a few listening stations, and that one is close to here. It's in the Chicago area. And what you see on the horizontal axis is time as elapsed time, and on the vertical axis, it's frequency. And I removed the actual frequency so that whoever I was recording wouldn't really come and complain too much. And the colors indicate the amount of power that you have on each of the frequency. So each of the frequency here is like a tone. I can't really whistle very well, but it's like one of them and another one. So they go like this. And you can see there's some kind of action here as a function of time. The power goes down, and it goes down synchronously on all the tones. So you can see something's happening there, but you don't see a lot. Here you can kind of tell something's happening, but you don't really see what's happening yet. To see what's happening, you need to go and look at the signal in a bit more depth. So if you look at the phase of each of the tones, the respective phases of the tones, then you get to see something like this. And each of the lines is represented by one phase as a function of time. And the thing that you should look at is the phase here. If you look at the green guy, it goes up, up, or down. And if you think is up as a signal which tells you to buy on the other side, then you can start to think, yeah, maybe you can send signals and you can send information and receive that in Europe maybe and decide to buy Euro stocks or sell Euro stocks. So let's look at it a little closer. If you focus on cleaner signals, now you can definitely see what I was saying. This looks like at every transition here, it looks like information is probably sent. Okay, all right. Now, how much information? To know that and to know also the rate of sending of the information, you need to have a little close-up look at that. So let's look at this. Now here it's interesting, the time scale, that is 20 millisecond. And you can see that the rise time of the phase change is less than 20 millisecond. You can probably detect it in 5 millisecond if it's clean. And here it's reasonably clean because we're recording in the Chicago area. It's going to be different once I show you something in Europe. But you can see that the signal is such that probably you can detect data in about 5 millisecond. Maybe less. Maybe it's 1 if the thing is. But anyway, it's the order of magnitude is there. And why 5 milliseconds important? It's because the latency advantage you have by going wireless from the CME to Frankfurt is much more than that. It's much more than 5 millisecond. So you start to think, oh, well, yeah, maybe that's usable. And if it's usable, you should go to Europe and see what you get. And what you get here is you don't need to build anything. You can go to the University of Twente, and on the University of Twente, they have a website where you can record the power. And if you know where it was broadcasted in the US, you can see that it was also received in Europe. And if you want to do a slightly better job, you need to build your own receive station, and you actually get a surprisingly clean signal. So do the same trick. Look at that. And here you see that there's noise, but there isn't that much noise on the center tones. And the reason, if I backtrack, is that there's a lot more energy here and a lot less here. So you can see that signal to noise starts to be important there. But if you look at the center ones, there's definitely real information reaching across. And if you look at one in particular, you can see that, yeah, maybe if you think that the blue guy is telling buy or sell, then you can use it. So obviously, when you use it, it's not 100% game. Because if you wait for not very long before you decide to trade, you'll have a lot of false positives. So if you bought the Euro stocks there, you may be sorry you did because you shouldn't have. So there's a whole optimization in this HF link which you have to go through to really use it well. But I must say we did it, and we don't have the absolute bet receive station. You can really improve on that. It's not super hard. Now, oops, let me motivate that. So now, the bit rate that you can get with this, the bit rate is absolutely minimal. Like this example that we looked at is maybe of the order of 250 bits per second. This is almost zero. It's almost zero, but really the tones, if you can look at all the 8 bits of that tone, it takes 5 milliseconds, and you don't think of it in bits per second, but you can say, okay, there's one word that I can hear on the other side, and that word maybe means something, and maybe I can use it to trade. And that word is really, you can say maybe one word every 30 milliseconds, and maybe that's more the order of magnitude that's of interest here. So then you have to compare that word to the number of important events on the CME. And if you define an important event as an event where an aggressor order goes and sweeps through the first limit and eats into the second and maybe the third, fourth, and you call this a trade through, you can go and look at the CME data and count the number of trade throughs per day. And that's what we've done here. So CL is crude. The number of trade throughs that make it to the second limit, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, you sure? Okay. So CL is about, 400 plus 600, like 1,000. If you add all the trade throughs on any given day and on all the different futures, the order of magnitude is something like 10,000. So if you can send across 10,000 words per day, for which shortwave can definitely do that, then you can actually send the most important market movers of the CME every day with HF. So HF looks like it's totally usable. So if you want to learn about this, the nice thing about HF is that it's been around for a long time. It's been used for Voice of America, for great propaganda, like it used to be Voice. Now I think it should be renamed Voice of Chicago. It really is Chicago's pacing the trading world. And you can go to that website and look at what can be done, because all the propagation conditions are worked out. You can spec your broadcast station. You can do everything you need, and you know and understand what can be done with that. So I'm not trying to announce that we have this live or that we'll have it live, but I'm trying to, in a very subtle way, tell you that we're trying to be serious about this. All right, so with this, I would like to open it for questions, if there are any time for questions. All right. Sorry, I would have loved to answer questions. Okay, thank you.